Hello and welcome to this segment of the Agon Institute's Sports Ministry Institute that is co-sponsored by Uncharted Waters and CSRM, the Association of Church, Sports, and Recreation Ministers, of which I serve as the Executive Director. My name is Dr. Greg Linville, and I'll be helping us understand today how the first century church and people involved in it, like the Apostle Paul, intersected and connected with the first century athletic world of his day and of that day. Now, for those of you that are taking this course for Talbot Seminary or any other seminary or school, you will be able to take this, and you're going to have a series of PowerPoints that will have blanks that you need to fill in, and there's also there a number of places for you to add notes to it. In order to get your full credit for your degrees that you're working for, you're going to want to make sure that you do, in fact, fill out all the blanks and take some good notes. Remember, it's got to be of exam quality. For those that are taking it for certification or just for your personal interest or growth, take whatever notes you'd like. But for both groups, we would want you to know that these notes should be taken with ministry involved and what you think God is laying on your heart. And we're doing this as a way to help you prepare yourself for your ministry, giving you some of the foundations and some of the things that were happening in that world, so that you know how to better impact this world. It gives you a foundation for your Bible studies and sermons and devotions and all that you're doing in your ministry. We're here filming at Chautauqua, and it's with some purpose and intent, and that is that a lot of what we're studying in the first part of this course has to do with body, mind, and spirit, of which the Chautauqua movement has been a real strong advocate of for over 140 years now. And so as you learn today about ancient Greece and Rome and how it intersects with the New Testament, I think you'll understand a lot of what goes on today. So we might get disturbed by some people or some sounds in the background, but I think it'll help us understand a little bit more about what it is we're intending to do at this study. So let's start off. If you have your PowerPoint, you're going to have on the first slide a map of ancient Greece and a little bit of what was called Asia Minor, or Turkey today, western part of Turkey. And you're going to see that there were 4 cities in ancient Greece that were closely identified both with sports and religion: Delphi, Nemea, Isthmia, and Olympia. And you probably have heard of the Olympic Games, but all 4 of these were similar to the Olympic Games, and they consisted of individual games, but combined they were part of what was called the Crown Games. There were 4 of them. So if you won all 4, it would be like today winning the Grand Slam of tennis or other sports when they have multiple venues and sites that you go to. So Delphi, Nemea, Isthmia, and Olympia. And you'll see that Nemea and Isthmia are very close to that isthmus, which is where the Isthmian Games gets its name. And it's the small piece of land that connected mainland Greece with the Peloponnesian Peninsula. These were the most prestigious and most honored of all the Greek games, although there were many others. And notice how that they were all intimately connected: the faith, the religion of that day, and their sport. These are pictures of these games. In the upper right-hand corner, the temple at Delphi. On the lower right-hand corner, you'll see the temple of Apollo, the sun god, and that was in Corinth. And Corinth was right beside both the Nemean and Isthmian game, just a couple miles from both. And then in the lower left-hand corner, you're going to see the picture in slide 2 of the Olympic stadium, if you will, and some of where the Olympic Games, ancient Olympic Games, were held. Now, the Pythian Games and the Olympic Games were held in opposite years of a quad, meaning they were held every 2 years from each other. So let's say on year 1 and 3, Olympia and the Pythian Games were held. And then on years 2 and 4, both the Nemean and the Isthmian Games were held. So they were held every 2 years, and the others were held every 4 years. Now, as we move through, you'll see Olympia in the upper left-hand corner, an overview of the whole site. And then Delphi, you'll see on the top right-hand part of that corner, you'll see the stadium. Down the hill a ways, the theater, and down just a little further, the temple, where the Oracle of Delphi gave the prophecies. Now, these 2 games are the ones that we have less assurance that Paul was involved in. I have absolutely nothing that indicates to me that Paul had any association with Delphi. No reference, no nothing. Olympia, I think he did have a strong knowledge of, if he did not in fact visit it at some point, because of what he wrote in Hebrews. And I do believe that he wrote Hebrews. But this is only conjecture that he actually was there. Delphi, nothing. But let's look at Olympia. This is an artist's rendering in your 4th slide about the compound around the Olympic Games. And notice how the stadium, where the running games were done, and some of the throwing games may have been done, and the palestra, where the wrestling, the pancratium, those kinds of boxing matches would have taken place, and a gymnasium where more of the other types of athletics occurred, and some of the running. And the gymnasium was also a place where the training took place. And the training was not just athletic, but also in the arts and intellectual and poetry and whatnot. But you can see that the main building there is the Temple of Zeus. Now, Zeus was the god that the Olympic Games were held in honor of. And his was the building, the temple there was the one that just very, very much dominated this whole compound. You can see outside of it there were places in front for statues and places where religious rituals would have taken place. So you get a sense of how integrated their faith and sport was. Now I'm going to give you a couple pictures, modern day, of the Temple of Zeus, and these would have been the pillars of that temple that have now fallen due to earthquakes and others. And you can see that it was in the grove of olive trees, the sacred olives of Zeus. This gives you a sense of, with me standing beside it, just how large these stones were. Tons in terms of weight, 2 to 3 feet in height, and probably a half a dozen or 7 feet or so wide. And again, in the sacred grove of the olive trees, because it was the olive tree that gave the branches that they created the Stephanos, or the encircled crown. For the 4 crown games, that's why they were called the 4 crown games, because you didn't win money. You didn't win anything worth of anything. You won vegetation that was woven into a crown. So it's kind of interesting how much the athletes strove for these things, as 1 Corinthians 9 says, for a perishable reward. Now this is the stadion where the running games would take place at Olympia. I'd like to call a couple things to your attention here. First of all, that a stadium, this particular one, was 192 meters. And we get our, in the English and particularly a lot of the Western world, there's the distance marker is in feet. Yes, originally somebody had a foot, and however many foot in front of the other, 1 foot in front of the other, that's how long they measured off. And that's why some were longer and some were shorter, according to whoever's foot it was measured by. This was a stadium where runners would run, and you can see about 10% of the way down there's a line of stones that are across the way, and those were the starting blocks. And so all the runners would spread out, and they would run to the other end. Now, a one-stadion race was one time down and cross the finish line. But a two-stadion was up and back, and they all had to run around a pole right in the middle. You can imagine the congestion. So a one would be up and up, a two would be up and back, a three would be up and back again, and a four would be twice around that pole and back. You can imagine the kind of racing that was seen here. Another thing that I'll call your attention to is about 2/3, 3/4 of the way up on the right-hand side. You'll see some blocks there. Those were the only seats that were built into this for anybody to come and sit on. Now, two things about that. One, the seats were for the Hellenodikai, the Greek Hellenodikai judges, meaning those that were the referees, those that were the officials of the games, and also whatever important other dignitaries and beautiful women that they would bring with them. But notice that there's no place else for spectators, because see, this was for athletes, not for spectators. This was a very harsh climate, and when I was there, the days that I've been there, it's been well over 90, into the hundreds of degrees. People didn't go watch this. It was not like it was today. And that's why you see no stands. That's why you see nothing there. Now, I will give you an interesting insight that in 2004, when the modern Olympic Games were played in Greece, the only event that was held of that Olympiad was at the original site. At this original site was the shot put, because the shot put was the only thing that could contain the modern day athletes. Everybody else could run too fast, throw too far, etc. Now, if you would back up from where that picture was taken, this is what you would see. You would see the archway that came into a larger, through a larger edifice that the athletes would walk through. And on the lower or the left-hand side, you see that path coming down from the Temple of Zeus. The athletes would pour out their offerings and say their prayers. They would walk down this pathway. And you see on the right-hand side of this picture, it would have been on the left-hand side of the athletes as they processed into the stadium, you see where they are placed some foundations for where statues went of the heads, the bust, if you will, of the many ancient athletes. And on the lower right-hand side, you'll see one such foundation, and you will see there some inscriptions that are written there. But now here's the catch. Those athletes' names who are inscribed, and the bust of those athletes that were put on top of them, they were in fact paid for by the very athletes whose names and heads were there. And this was required of any athlete who had to cheat to win. This was their hall of shame, if you will. Their hall of shame is simply the last thing that they saw before they would go into the stadium. The next picture shows you actually the gymnasium. 2 lanes where they would run up and back and train. And you see the pillars that would hold up the portico that acted as an air conditioning system for them in this hot climate. The winds would blow through, kind of like the winds are blowing through here. And in the same way that this is designed, this Chautauqua Chapel at a memorial park is designed in the same way to bring in the breezes that you might hear and you might see. And this is where the training was done. And just to the left side, there would be rooms where they would be trained in those things like the poets and the history and the philosophers. Now again, here's Delphi and the Pythian Games. And the Pythian Games celebrated the victory that the sun god Apollo had over the Python. But again, as I said, there's nothing that I can connect the Pythian Games to Paul or the New Testament with. But the Pythian Games, the crown was made of laurel branches. This is where we get today our laureates conversations and nomenclatures. So the Nobel laureate originally was crowned by a laurel wreath. And you can see some of the background here to the Pythian games, the starter blocks on the left, the individual, these would, on the right, lower right would be, this would be the changing room, and that would be a little tub where a little bit of water and oil would be there for the athletes. And you see the stadium there that was at Delphi. And then the two that I think were more associated with Paul would be Nemea, just outside of Corinth, and you're now on slide number 14. And while I believe that Nemea could have been kind of a corroborative type of sense for Paul when he was inspired by the Holy Spirit to write what he wrote, it could have helped to form the background to writings such as that Paul did to Timothy or to the Corinthians. But I really think that even though Nemea was close, a bit south and west of ancient Corinth, on the Peloponnese, just west of the Isthmus, near Argos, I really believe that it was Isthmia that really captured Paul. Okay, let's grab history where we're at. In Acts, Paul has left Athens. He's been laughed out of the city. He's been ridiculed. He leaves fairly depressed. He leaves fairly disillusioned, if not greatly disillusioned, and he comes now to Corinth. In order to get to Corinth, he had to walk right past the site of the Isthmian Games. The pathway went right through the Isthmian Games site. He would have had to have seen it. And if not then, he would have had to have seen it when he walked back, when he went to the port of Cenchreae, which is where he embarked on a boat to go back to Jerusalem, if you remember that history. Now, I believe that this is the place that was the background to 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 to 8, and 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24 and following. These pictures that you see on the right side are of the beginning spot of where the runners would take off on their stadium run. And you see that I am down in the starter's hole, and then my friend Jim is up where the Husplex was. Now, you'll come to understand that more in a moment, but you can see that this is the athletic side of Isthmia. In the upper left-hand corner, I'm poured out because that is the foundation, remaining foundation, for the temple that was honored in the honor of the god of the Isthmian Games by the name of Poseidon. Poseidon was the god of the sea, because this isthmus separated the Gulf of Corinth from the Sardonic Gulf, just a couple miles of a stretch of land that separated these two oceans. And so therefore Poseidon was the god. Now, these excavations were done by a man by the name of Oscar Bronier. Oscar taught and was highly associated with the University of Chicago. He spent a lifetime at Isthmia in Corinth. Let me explain what happened with him. He would take square foot at a time and go down about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch with styluses and brushes like toothbrushes, and gently move away dust and dirt so that he could see what was there. And then after he got to a certain point, he would draw what he saw. Those drawings and those writings now are in libraries. And when I read them, I had to wipe away a boatload of dust. My wife has said I'm probably the only person that's ever read them in the last generation. Be that as it may, Oscar Bronier and his students gave their lives to this. And yet here's my real sadness in all of this. You see in these pictures that we don't have the stadium because he couldn't get rights to them, because there are modern day homes and people living on top of these ancient athletic grounds. Now you're going to see some more pictures coming up of the larger things that he excavated, but I am still in hope that maybe someday one of my students or or something will happen, and we will uncover these corroborations, these affirmations of our New Testament that will help us to understand them and know them even better. This is what we have so far, but there's still treasures yet uncovered there. I hope you get a chance to go there. Now let me show you the Husplex. Now, that top of the picture is not the impediment of a Greek temple, but rather it's a picture like looking straight down, and that hole is where I was standing, and in the lower picture where the starter is now residing. And then you can see that each of those little circles are where these upright pieces of wood would be inserted, and then the crossbar would be across from that, and then a string would be pulled, and then this would drop, and this was the starting blocks. This was this latest technology of the Greeks in that era to ensure a straight and a even start amongst all those that participated. So on this slide number 17, you get a picture below of these naked Greek athletes, and they're being released due to this Husplex. Now back to that picture of looking down, you'll see lots of different lines. These were chiseled into the hard rock, where the string would come down the pole and then go and run in these grooves back to the starter, pull them all at the same time, so that the runners would not trip over them, and they would all have an equal start. A very ingenious system at that particular time. Now, here's a look at the overall village of Isthmia. You'll see in the lower section a modern-day grove of trees, and just to the south of it, towards us, as we look at that picture, is the remains of the athletic village. The athletic village is where all the athletes would stay. Now, in front of that is the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount was where the Temple of Zeus would come, and the Temple of Zeus would have where all the athletes would come and say their prayers and do their rituals. Now, the Isthmian Games, as I said, were in honor of Poseidon. And also at the Games, in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that there's a theater, and then you'll see up in the right-hand corner, you'll see a artist rendering of what the temple to Zeus would, or Poseidon, any of those gods, would look like. And you'll see the hard lines, meaning those would be kind of the walls, and then you would see those black circles around, and they would be, in fact, the post, if you will, kind of like you see in the background of this building that was built with this kind of concept in mind. This Chautauqua temple that we're recording in has the same kind of mentality that they did in these ancient Greeks, and for much the same reason: body, mind, and spirit. Again, the Chautauqua movement built on those four pillars of the arts, religion, education, and what's the fourth one? Yes, I've forgotten it already. Education. All of these would be to what these Greek athletes were trying to do. And so you get a sense in the upper left-hand corner of the temple at Corinth, with the Acro-Corinth in the background, that the temple and all of these things are very much part and parcel of the Greek concept of games and interacting, intersecting, and integrating with sport and faith. Now you see in the slide 20 this beautiful mosaic that was uncovered by Brunier and his students. And they, in fact, were absolutely stunned when they began to uncover this. You see the nautical theme of dolphins, octopus, fish, mermaids. And then you see in the back, in the upper part of the picture, you'll see those bases for those pillars again that would develop the portico. this gives you a sense of the absolute beauty and the absolute lavishness that was bestowed upon this game, because this game site, because it was so important to the Greeks. And it was, as I've said, the games that have been the most participated in by both athletes and spectators every 2 years. And because it was close to the city, close to the trade routes on land and sea routes going across the isthmus, and all these accommodations that they had, the weather was a little better, climate was better. And for those reasons, the Isthmian Games stuck out more and were more participated in than any other. Now, they weren't as prestigious to win as the Olympic Games, but they were the most participated in. Now, here's another sense of this, the grandeur of this. This, you see, is the basement of the sauna, of the steam bath. You see at the upper part of the picture where the hot springs water would flow in and circulate this whole bottom. You can see kind of on the bricks out was discolored because of the water that came in there. Fairly high sulfur content. And then these pillars in the middle would stand up, and they were rocks that would keep the heat, but then they also supported a floor of which the athletes would then walk in, and the floor would have open air grates where the steam would rise up. And we're talking about 100 degrees or better that would come in. And so the athletes, after their athletic endeavors, they would come out and they would come into these steam baths to soothe their muscles and get the rub downs. I show this to you to help you understand what Paul saw, what the first century church would understand. This was absolutely amazing in that day and age. The technology, the architecture, the amount of money that went into these Isthmian Games. These were no small games. This was no small endeavor. This was incredible. Now, it wasn't, however, just the 4 crown games. This gives you the picture of the Greek, the Alexander the Great's empire, the extent of it geographically, that made up a large portion of what then became the Roman Empire. And I show you this picture to show you that throughout just the shaded area, there were over 200 Greek cities that had stadiums and gymnasiums. 200. This was not just concentrated in 4 cities. This was not just a few people. This culture permeated, absolutely permeated that first century. And even though it was now a Roman Empire, this part of the Greek culture continued on. Now, just another city, just to give you another idea of one that Paul spent a lot of time in, and he probably would have seen. This is the remains of the stadium at Ephesus, where he writes about contending with wild beasts, by the way. And this would give you an idea of something that happened in Turkey, not too far from where Paul would have traveled, a smaller city, probably Epidaurus, and you get a sense of some of these various kinds of stadiums. Well, it's time to turn our attention now to Rome. And in a later video that you'll watch in a couple sessions from now, I'm going to give you an overall view of the Greek, the Roman, and then also the Hebraic perspectives of sport and how it intersected with faith. But what you need to understand now is that the Greeks had a high ideal. Their athletics were very, very significant in terms of helping them teach about virtue and morals, and that they saw people who competed as being highly virtuous people. The Romans, however, it went huge decadence. It was a very horrible kind of athletics. I don't know that we would call them athletics, unless you might think that the ultimate warrior kind of competitions today, or if you really love the gruesome hits on the NFL fields, then maybe you would begin to like what happened at Rome. What you have in front of you is the Roman Colosseum on slide 25. The Roman Colosseum that you see is the remnants. And what you see would have been the underground of this Colosseum. In the center, the oval part, there would have been a floor that would have been then covered with sand. Why sand? Because it was a lot easier to clean up the dung and refuse from the animals that were killed there. Think of it as a big kitty litter box. And also the blood of the gladiators. It soaked up the blood. It was a little more hygienic than any kind of stone. But what you see now, what might be considered the locker rooms or the training rooms or the cages for the animals or the prison cells for the prisoners, this would all be part of the underground. And then there would be trapdoors that would come up and then they would come out. And then those seats that you see in the upper part of the bowl where this next slide takes us, slide 26. This is where the people would come in. And they would cheer these gruesome deaths. Think with me. Young Christian children dressed in lambskins because they were sheep. They were considered sheep of the shepherd. And they were led up in a group, and they came out and they saw all of these cheering, jeering, laughing, mocking, up to 60,000 people perhaps, at least 45,000 people. And then suddenly they would hear the snarls and the growls and the roars of the lions and the tigers and the bears and the wild dogs that would come to rip them to shreds. The gladiators that fought to the death, severing limb after limb. That's why in this picture you can faintly make out in the center upper third a white cross there. That white cross was put there shortly after these games and these activities were banned by the Roman government. It stood there, I believe I have my facts right, well for 1,000 years or more before it was finally removed because people didn't want to use the cross anymore as any kind of symbol at all. But it has been reinstated, and the last that I knew, it was still there. And the reason that it was reinstated is much like why we have the memorials that help us remember the Holocaust of World War II. Not to aggrandize it, but just like those today remember the millions of Jews and Christians who were killed by the Nazis, and more than killed, maimed and mutilated, that this cross stands as a memorial to all those who lost their death. Many, many who were Christians, and their only crime was to be a Christian. The white seats you see there, those that had the best views were the politicians and those high-ranking people. They had a first row seat of the blood and the gore. Yes, the Romans perverted these high Greek ideals. It also happened here at the Circus Maximus, circus meaning circular, and maximus meaning great, the largest. Some estimates indicate that this would be in excess of 250,000, others up to 365,000 that would have crowded in to the Circus Maximus, again to see the bloodshed. Although a lot of chariot races were held here. You'll get a sense of it if you've ever watched the movie Ben-Hur, of which there's a new one that is in production today. Okay, it's the end of the slides, or the end of the pictures that you have in front of you. Here in the Agon Institute of Sports Ministry, and for whatever university or seminary or certificate that you're seeking, this particular video is positioned at the beginning of this course to give us a sense of where we are today and where we've come from. It's the beginning point of our map, if you will. The sports outreach movement didn't just get invented a few years ago by guys like Tim Conrad, Roger Oswald, or others. Brian Mason didn't come up with this idea. Now, these are all intelligent guys, but they're standing on the shoulders of a lot of other people. And this course, we're going to go from where we are here in the first century, and we're going to jump way up into the 1800s, 1900s, and the 2000s to show and help you understand the pioneers of the last 150, 200 years in the sports outreach movement, the Muscular Christianity Era. But that was all based on some of the principles that were learned in the first century. And so not only will these pictures, I think, help you understand, and this commentary help you understand better how to prepare your sermons and your teaching and all that you do for devotionals and information and training, but it also helps you understand that this concept of the integration of faith and sport has been around even in pagan religions, in heathen religions, like the Greek and the Roman. And that as the Jews began to look at it, they began to critique it and say there's some things that aren't right here. And then Paul comes onto the scene, and he takes, as Paul does so well under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, that he says, but it's not all bad. There's a lot good here, and what is bad, and even what isn't so bad, we need to reform. We need to restore. We need to take it to a new level. And so when we jump ahead, we're going to start to hear about the Muscular Christian Era. We're going to hear about those pioneers during that time. And then how out of the Muscular Christian Era there are lessons to be learned for our sports outreach movement that we're in today when this is being filmed. But it's all got this common root that sport and faith naturally go together. And the integration of it is so important. And so you're going to learn in this course some models that are based on that three-tier paradigm. And we're going to help you think theologically to envision how to organize philosophically, and then how to minister methodologically, all based in these same roots that continue to be revisited generation after generation as people through the millennia have tried to integrate faith and sport. All right, take your notes well, get them filled out, make sure you fill them in and turn them in however you need to for credit, whether you're taking this for certification or for a degree. And please know that our heart in all of this is not to bore you with a bunch of dusty old rocks and stories, but to empower you to go to this world in evangelistic disciple-making activities that are efficiently effective and strategically relevant. Thanks for being part of this time.